Well, we continue to unpack the recent crime figures and what they mean. Rape increased by over 70% between April and June, and that's only cases that were actually reported. The drastic increase is being linked to the easing of lockdown restrictions. So just what needs to be done about this societal scourge? I'm joined now by gender activist Lisa Vetten. Lisa, thanks for your time. We appreciate it. What do you make of these latest figures? Because it seems that the police minister is trying to tell us not to be too dramatic about them, given the hard lockdown versus what we're seeing now.
Well, he's right in one respect, is in that last year, this time, we were under hard lockdown, and so the movements outside were drastically restricted, and that had an effect on the number of rapes. So it's much more reasonable to compare the period 2019-20 with now in order to get a sense of what the increase is. And when you do that, then the increase is reduced to 2%, which is still of concern, of course. So we shouldn't be comparing and looking at the 70% from last year, but we should be looking at the previous year in order to get a more accurate sense of what's going on. I think the other thing to bear in mind is that people often focus on Gauteng as having had the greatest increase. Well, to some extent, that's to be expected because there are the most people in Gauteng. So if a province like Northern Cape, which has the smallest population, was to report the greatest increase, then you'd think something very strange was going on. But to see the greatest number of rapes being reported in Gauteng is entirely consistent with it being the province with the largest population in the country.
Yeah. Still, 10,000 people reporting rapes during this period is still ridiculously high, especially since, we were promised this emergency response plan to deal with gender-based violence. Are we seeing any results from there? Are we seeing it being effective at all?
That's a very hard question to answer. I mean, there are a couple of things that we need to understand in terms of how we go about reducing rape. The first is that about 40% of rapes are stranger rapes, and about the other 60% occur between people who are known to each other, especially when you're dealing with children. It's very hard for the police to observe people's homes and their social environment, so that's very difficult for them to intervene in. But where it is important for the police to intervene, and where one does become very concerned, is in the question of DNA analysis. There's a certain number of stranger rapes that are serial rapes. And when the DNA laboratories are not functional and there's a backlog in cases, it means that you're potentially missing rapists. And I'll give you a recent example, for instance. There was the Facebook rapist. He was arrested in Delmas in October last year, released because he couldn't be linked to other rapes. He moved to Gauteng and between December and March committed 10 rapes. He was eventually tracked because of linkages around the Facebook messaging and other cyber tracing methods. But that is an example of where, had the police DNA labs been working effectively, it's possible that those 10 rapes might not have been occurred because that man would have remained in custody. So that's the kind of stuff we should be asking the police about and asking them what are they doing to address that backlog and what is their rate of detection of serial rape, because that is within their control and that they can prevent.
Yeah, exactly. I spoke to another individual this week, Bali Shongwe, who was raped and had a very bad experience at a police station. Eventually, her case was not pursued because of a lack of DNA evidence. And also, police, as she argues, basically did nothing. They treated her very badly, even mocked her. Why are we still talking about this when it seems to be something that should be given attention and priority, because we need DNA evidence for convictions?
Well, exactly. And I think part of the problem has been, it seems, corruption in procurement. So that needs to be understood if that's been addressed. But it also seems that the systems themselves at the labs don't work very well. And that's about the management of the labs. That's about whether or not they have enough technicians who are able to do the work. So I think it would be very useful to have that kind of nitty-gritty detail to understand what is going on. I think the other question to be asked is rapes that occur in rural provinces. Now, some years back when I was based at our office in Mpumalanga, the police officer there had to drive through a 4 to 5 hour drive with rape kits every so often to take them to be analysed. And what that meant was happening in practice was that those kits were piling up, and every 2-3 months they were making the trip through in order to go and deliver them. And that had a lot to do with the fact that there weren't enough vehicles and there weren't enough officers to investigate, and dropping those off took an entire day. So, it's also inefficiencies like that and the differences between rural and urban provinces. So I think we need a really good investigation and discussion of what is happening to DNA evidence.
Yeah, one last quick one, and that, of course, is the response by police when people go to report these crimes. It's still quite shocking hearing what women are going through. Why is that still a problem when we also heard that we're going to be sensitive about these issues, but we're still not?
That's a problem of police management. I mean, there's some stations where there have been very positive reports of how the police have dealt with somebody, and others where the reports are pretty shocking. The difference there is not necessarily one of training. It's about how much the station commander perhaps prioritizes the rapes, how much and sees it as an issue, and is checking and is maintaining oversight over what's going on. So that's really a question of police performance. And I think it is time that provincial commissioners were held to account in terms of how well they treat complainants, because with rape being so underreported, whether or not you have more or less reports is not really within the police's control. But what is within their control is how well they treat complainants to ensure that more women are willing to come forward and report. But at this point, that aspect of their performance is not measured at all.
All right, thank you so much for your time and your insight. Appreciate it. Gender activist Lisa Vetten.